Well, let's get some more thoughts on that plan and tax in general with John Caudwell, who was the founder, of course, of Phones for You. Very good to talk to you, Mr. Caudwell. Now, tell me, first of all, about these G7 decisions about trying to level the playing field on corporation tax. Do you think they're going to make it work? Do you think they're going to get it across the line?
There is no reason whatsoever why not. And it's a long, long overdue change. It's been completely immoral that large multinationals were able to hide taxes in low tax regimes, not pay the fair amount of tax, and the whole of society suffers and nobody benefits. And let's face it, a 15% minimum rate of tax is not a very low hurdle rate. It's not a, it's really not a very low, it's not a very high hurdle rate. And the only winner out of low taxation are shareholders that suddenly benefit by massive increase in shareholder value. And that is grossly unfair. Once these companies are taxed at an appropriate level, there'll be no losers whatsoever, and society will benefit. Society will be a much fairer place.
But, I mean, you mentioned the 15%. Is that a bit of a fudge, really, then? Because, in advanced economies, corporation tax rates are in their 20s, ranging from low 20s to high 20s. 15%, if a country offers that, it's still a competitive advantage against potentially one of its neighbours.
Yes, but it's not really a country tax, is it? It's a multinational minimum tax. So, therefore, anybody that manages to hide their profitability in a low tax, very, very low tax country. And we've all seen the likes of Google and Amazon and Apple hiding vast amounts of money and paying almost zero in corporation tax. And that will come to an end under this. And you are absolutely right that 15% is a very low hurdle, but it's better 15% than 1% or 2%. And the beauty of this is it's a start point towards a fairer society and towards the fairer distribution of wealth. Not robbing the rich to feed the poor, but being fair and appropriate.
OK, John, I've got to ask you this because our viewers will notice, so we put our locations where our guests come from up on the screen. I notice you're talking to us from Monaco. I've got to ask you about the tax havens that will continue to exist. I mean, it's noted for its low personal tax rates. Won't they have to be looked at as well? Quite a lot of them as well, not just Monaco. Quite a lot of the other ones are British territories.
Well, before I answer that question, I should probably say I'm the only person living in Monaco that's all resident here and yet paying the taxes in the UK and no plan to change. So I think I just better clarify that. But no, I think there'll always be a degree of tax havens, and it's probably right and proper that there's an element of that because it's a way of poorer countries growing the gross domestic product and bringing themselves out of poverty. But what I really object to is very, very clever, rich multinationals using all this tax planning and all of this accountancy brainwork to avoid paying almost any tax at all. And a minimum rate of tax will eliminate most of that.
Now, I know you've got a really good idea as well relating to the pandemic. We've seen, huge winners and huge losers, of course, in terms of businesses. And you've got a view, and I want to ask you how you think it'll work, that some of those companies that have done extremely well out of this ongoing crisis should pay a windfall tax.
Yes, absolutely. I've been an advocate of windfall tax now for over a year because it's crystal clear last March that there were going to be big winners and big losers. And it's just not fair that the big winners, they've got a business model that suits the environment, and that business model being online was always going to grow and prosper, so they were always going to do very well. But suddenly having a massive windfall profit as a consequence of COVID driving footfall to their online businesses and starving so many other businesses and putting them into bankruptcy seems eminently unfair. And so a one-off windfall tax against those companies, just on the estimated excess profits, wouldn't damage them one bit and would just balance up society a little bit more, make it a fairer society and enable us to be a bit more humanitarian.
But it's the same argument, isn't it, that goes for corporation tax in a way in terms of catching them, nailing them down in one country. If they're a tech company with not much of the mortar of the physical infrastructure. Where are they based? Where are they taxed? If they're a supermarket, for instance, let's talk about companies that have done well out of the pandemic. They're easy to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all part of the same problem, because no matter how much you clamp down on businesses, if there's too many tax havens they can hide behind, then it's not going to work. But I think if you've got a globalized tax minimum, and even though that's only the G7 countries, America, of course, leads the way on this. And if America agrees to that, and their multinationals can't get away with less than 15%, they'll either pay taxes in the countries where they're making the profits, or they'll pay taxes in the US, or a combination of both. And society will be eminently fairer. And it has to be, because we cannot have this massive rich-poor divide where some people are prospering enormously, and especially out of the devastation that COVID has caused, and that other people are being starved to death. It is completely unsustainable in the long term, and has to be corrected for us to have a humanitarian society.
But in terms of those divides, I understand them within a single society. But what about between countries, between the so-called developed and developing world? Shouldn't the developing world be allowed to get that competitive advantage, to attract those businesses, to get the tax revenues, to build their economies?
Absolutely. I've got no objection to that at all, to some extent, because I think economies that need to build themselves because they're in a third world condition and they need to attract inward investment, they need to try and be competitive, they need to lift themselves out of the poverty gap. And it's not that situation that I object to. It's the large, mostly US-based multinationals who manage to pay virtually zero tax.
John Caudwell, really great talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
John Caudwell there with his thoughts, amongst other things, for a windfall tax on companies that have done well out of the pandemic.